So today we're going to take a quick look at the anatomy of the heart. And so we're going to start with the layers of the heart. So from innermost to outermost, we're going to have a layer of the heart that allows us to have a place where the blood can just run through. And this tends to be a very smooth layer. And you're going to see it here as the endocardium. So the endocardium, I'll write it up here, is going to be the innermost layer of the heart. And so this is the layer of the heart that is going to have blood move through it. It's intimate with the blood. It sees the blood. It touches the blood. Now, if we move one layer outwards, we're going to hit the middle layer. And this layer is probably the most talked about layer because it gives the heart its function, which is to pump. Our heart is a pump. It's an engine that pushes stuff through. And so it's going to have a tissue that allows it to move stuff, which is the myocardium. Myo meaning muscle. And this is going to be the middle layer. This is the middle layer. Think myocardium, middle layer. And that's this layer right here. Okay, that's the myocardium. It's a muscle layer, and if you move throughout the heart, you're going to see different thicknesses pertaining to what that chamber does and where it's supposed to send the blood. So that's the myocardium. It's the middle layer. Again, if we move one layer outwards, we're going to have the outermost layer, and that's this guy right here. He is the epicardium. If I underline him in the picture, he's him right here, okay, the epicardium. And this epicardium is made up of a fatty layer and also simple squamous epithelial layer. And he can also be called the visceral pericardium. You see that right about right there. Okay, and so what the visceral pericardium is like a double-layered sac that holds the heart and it anchors it down so it's just not moving all over the place. That's what the pericardium is going to do. However, it's a double-layered sac, meaning it's going to have two layers to it, and so this portion is the visceral pericardium. Viscera meaning on top of the organ. It's the organ. Okay, and we're going to see another one that is over here, this one right here, and this is the parietal pericardium. I'm going to try my best to spell this one out as neat as I can. Parietal pericardium. And it's like I said before, this is a sac that just contains the heart, and this sac lubricates the heart. It protects it from infection. And just anchors it down to the mediastinum, the outermost cavity of where the heart is. So in between the parietal pericardium and the visceral pericardium, we're going to have a little space here. Okay, that little space is going to be full of serosal fluid, pericardial fluid, and like I said before, it just lubricates the hearts. So that was a quick look at the layers of the heart. Let's go ahead and make our way over here to the structures of the hearts. Okay, sorry about all that movement. So now that we've talked about the layers of the hearts, let's go ahead and talk about the structures, what's inside. Okay, we're going to have 4 chambers of the heart, and these 4 chambers are going to do one of 2 functions. One of them is to receive, sorry about that, blood, receive blood, and the other one, the other type of chamber is going to pump blood. Okay? So what I mean by receiving and pumping is that the chambers who are responsible for receiving blood are primarily only going to hold the blood there for a limited amount of time before the blood continues to move on. And so the receiving chambers to the blood are the right and the left atria. So I want you to associate the word atria with receiving chambers. They're only going to have the blood there for a little bit before the blood gets pushed down into the next chambers. So right underneath receive, I'm going to put RA and LA for right atria and left atria. Okay. Now, the next pair of chambers are going to be pump chambers. They're going to have a thicker muscular wall than what you see in the right and left atrium. And so these pumping chambers are going to be the right ventricle and the left ventricle. So again, I'll put them underneath pump, and I put the right ventricle and the left ventricle. There are pumping chambers. You'll see it in a second on how thick their muscular wall is. I want to talk really quick about this portion right here, this slanted cross that I drew. What this is going to represent is basically how these organs are structured or are placed inside the heart. The atria, for example, they're going to be receiving blood either from the body, our system, or they're going to be receiving blood from the lungs. So the right side of the heart, every time you look at the right side of the heart, remember you have to flip it. It's like a mirror image of yourself. The right side of the heart is going to be over here. And on the very top of this cross, I'm going to put RA for right atrium, because this is the first receiving chamber of the heart. It's going to be the first chamber of the heart that sees blood that's coming from the system. Okay, it's coming from the body. So it's going to be the first chamber, first receiving chamber. If we associate this right atrium with its ventricle, this right atrium will hold blood until the blood in it goes into the right ventricle. Okay, and that's the associated ventricle with that atrium. The right atrium holds the blood until it's ready to go into the right ventricle, and the right ventricle is the pump to this side of the heart. Okay, after this side of the heart, the right ventricle is going to pump, and it's going to push that blood into the lungs, the pulmonary trunk and the lungs, and then we're going to come back on the left side, and the process repeats itself with the atria and the ventricles. On the left side, you're going to have the left atria receiving the blood that just came from the lungs, and it's going to hold it there until it's ready to go down into its respective ventricle, which is the left ventricle. So we've just talked about the four chambers: right atria, right ventricle, left atria, left ventricle. The right atria and the left atria are receiving chambers. The right ventricle and the left ventricle are pumping chambers. Now I want to talk about the vessels. So, the vessels. These are the vessels that are going to be coming in and out of the heart and taking it into some type of circulation. Okay, I'm going to write those circulations down real quick. So, our heart will pump into two different circulations. And so you have the pulmonic circulation, and you have the systemic, or our body circulation. Okay, pulmonic meaning lungs, systemic meaning body. And so these vessels are the ones going in and out of those circulations, bringing blood to the heart, or they're taking blood away from the heart. So you're going to have the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. These two are bringing blood back from the body into the first receiving chamber. Remember what that one is. What's the first receiving chamber of the heart? And then you're going to have the pulmonary arteries, which are the vessels taking blood away from the heart and towards the lungs. Okay? The next set of vessels is going to be the pulmonary veins. These pulmonary veins bring blood from the lungs into the heart. and there's 4 of them, okay? And then finally, once we go through the process of the left ventricle and, the left atrium and the left ventricle, we're going to hit the largest vessel of our body, which is this guy right there, the aorta. So that's the structure of the heart. That's what's inside. And we'll take a look at it through that picture right there in just a second. But what I want to do is I want to cover valves first. Okay? I do want to cover valves of the heart before we go on. So really quickly, valves, their number one function is to prevent backflow. Okay, their number one function is to prevent backflow. You don't want anything coming backwards. They're gonna help blood being pushed forward. Okay, everything's gonna go forward. So these valves are going to prevent backflow. That's the biggest thing that I need you to remember. So let's talk about these different types of valves. We have the atrioventricular valves. So these valves right here, AV valves are what I'll be calling them. And you have 2 sets. You have the tricuspid valve, which looks a little something like this. See if I can draw this out. Forgive my drawing skills. Okay, it's going to have 3 cusps. And these 3 cusps are going to open into the right ventricle. They open into the right ventricle. Okay, so once the right ventricle receives blood and it contracts, that blood is not going to come back into the right atrium. It's not. It can't because of the tricuspid valve and its functions. If we look at the other one, the other AV valve, this guy right here, this AV valve is what they call the bicuspid, also known as the mitral valve, and he looks a little something like this. Bi meaning 2, so he's going to have just 2 cusps right there, and he's going to be on the left side. So atrioventricular, telling us that it's in between the atria and the ventricles. So once the left atria pushes the blood down into the ventricle, that blood cannot come back. Okay, cannot go back into the atria. So those are the AV valves. Again, we'll look at them on the heart in just a second. Next, we have the semilunar valves, and I just noticed that we are missing one semilunar valve. So I'm just going to go ahead and write it in. Okay, one of the semilunar valves that I forgot is the aortic valve. Okay, now let's talk about them. So the semilunar valves are going to operate just a little bit differently, but I want you guys to see that off the heart before I explain that. These semilunar valves are going to be between a ventricle and one of the circulations. Okay, so you have the pulmonic valve, and this guy is going to open up into the pulmonic circulation. It allows blood to flow into it so that we're headed towards the lungs. And the next valve is the aortic valve. Okay, the aortic valve is going to open up into the systemic circulation. So once the left ventricle here pumps blood, it's going to go through the aortic valve and into the systemic circulation and then on into all of the body's tissues. Okay, so those are the valves of the heart written out. We're going to see them in just a bit, but please remember their function is to prevent backflow. Okay, accidentally, let me erase that. Let's go into the next part, okay, which is right here, the coronary arteries. So now we're going to have 3 coronary arteries that I want to talk about really fast. And so these arteries are going to nourish the heart with oxygen and nutrients. So I'm just going to write it out over here. Nourish with oxygen, O2, and other nutrients. So they're basically the heart's lifeline, because this pump needs nutrients. It needs oxygen, just like all other tissues of the body. So we're going to have three major coronary arteries. The first one I want to talk about is going to be on the right side of the heart, and so this is going to be the right coronary artery. And if you can see it, he's coming off right off of the roots, the stem of that aorta, okay? And he's going to make his way all the way down the right side and descending towards the back. This is the distal branch of the right coronary artery, okay? So everything on the right side of the heart is going to get blood from this artery right here. If we move to the left side, we have the left anterior descending. Let me underline that. Left anterior descending. And again, much like the right coronary artery, he's coming off the root of this aorta, and he's coming towards the main portion of the heart, okay? I mean the anterior portion of the heart. You're also going to see a branch here, and this branch is headed towards the posterior aspect of the heart. This branch is called the circumflex artery, and the circumflex artery, if you can see it, comes this way, and then it makes its way towards the back of the heart and nourishes all of that. So those are the three major coronary arteries. One quick thing to note, okay, is just that the left anterior descending artery is popularly termed as the widowmaker. The widowmaker. He's on the left side, and this left anterior descending artery just happens to be nourishing one of the thickest, strongest chambers of the heart. So I'm pretty sure you can guess why they call him the widowmaker. Because if you lose him, if he becomes occluded and you start having ischemic changes, then that's going to be a big issue. Okay? Now, finally, we've talked about all these things. Now let's apply it to this picture right here. Okay? This is going to be our diagram of the heart. So let's talk about the four chambers first of all. Okay? The four chambers, I'm going to color code this as best as I can. So down here, blue is going to mean no oxygen. It's deoxygenated. Okay? Red is going to mean that the blood on this side has oxygen. So as I mentioned earlier, you're going to have two sides of the heart, and it's like a mirror image. So your right side is over here, and your left side is actually over here. So let's talk about the right side first, and I'm going to go ahead and label this. So you have the right atrium. I'll put RA. And this is the first receiving chamber. Notice that it receives blood from this guy, the superior vena cava, and this guy, okay? SVC, IVC. And they're going to dump their blood into the right atrium. He is going to be followed up by the first AV valve, which is the tricuspid valve. Okay, he's a tricuspid valve. And so he, like I said, remember, he's got three cusps. He's going to allow blood to flow down from the right atrium into the first pumping chamber of the heart, which is the right ventricle. Okay, this is the RV, right ventricle. Once the right ventricle pumps, it's not going to be able to go back up into the right atria, so it has to be redirected into this direction. And so here we see the first semilunar valve. So I'm going to put this over here, okay, which is the pulmonic valve. Yeah, the pulmonic valve. Now, this pulmonic valve opens up into the pulmonic circulation, and you're going to have, I'm going to erase this R right here. You're going to have this pulmonic circulation bifurcate or split into two vessels. You have one here, and then you have the other one way over here. And these are the two pulmonary arteries. These are the two pulmonary arteries. Okay. Now, they're going to go to the lungs and exchange with the lungs oxygen and carbon dioxide. And now we're going to come back over to the left side. So let me bring on my red marker. And here we have the vessels. One on the left side, or two on the left side, two on the right side. And these guys are going to be the pulmonary veins. Okay. They're going to dump into the second receiving chamber of the heart, which is the left atrium. The left atrium is going to hold it and then eventually dump it through this guy, and he's called the bicuspid valve. Blood's going to flow through him and then finally hit the strongest, thickest chamber of the heart, which is the left ventricle, the LV. Okay, so that's him. Now, the left ventricle pumps. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see this, but he's going to pump upwards because remember, the bicuspid valve isn't going to allow it to go back into the left atrium. So he's going to go. I'm going to redirect this little arrow that I drew here. Okay, he's going to go through the aortic valve. And then finally we have the aorta. So that is the structure of the heart.